Okay, so I think first of all we should really explain what is the Malfosse, Nick, and why is it important?
Well, the Malfosse is a ditch right next to the battlefield, called Malfosse because in the Chronicle of Battle Abbey it describes what happens in the battle in quite some detail, and at the end it tells you that there is an event that happens right at the end of the battle, even after the main event, where the English are being chased off the battlefield. And it says, lamentably, a huge ditch yawned, which extended a considerable distance, and the Normans, in their wisdom, pursued the English off the battlefield through this undulating land full of briars, and a large number of the Normans, who were in full flight on horseback chasing them, lost their lives. And this event they called the Malfosse, the bad ditch incident. And it's not at Battle Abbey, and you have to think that in order for a large number of horsemen to die, there had to be some significant
land feature.
And they did say they thought it might have been caused by storms or was just a cleft in the landscape.
And one of the most significant things about the Malfosse is that if that number of knights died, that has to be a significant land feature, and that simply does not exist up at the battle site.
No, and also, upon first impression of the new battle site, is that you can look at the landscape and you can't see that. It is extremely well hidden in the undergrowth. But if you were to pursue people off the battlefield, you'd be in trouble. And that's exactly what happened. But along the Malfosse, there are a number of paths, which obviously the English knew about, because the paths crossed the ravine. There were strategic places where there were bridges. So when they were scurrying off the battlefield, they would have run down the paths, those who knew, whereas the Normans wouldn't. They wouldn't have known about the paths, because the paths were simply undergrowth paths, and if you were on horse, you didn't need them.
One of the other things I picked up from your book, which I found fascinating, is that Crowhurst was Harold's manor. So he would have been intimately acquainted with all of its nooks and crannies. So to what degree do you think this was actually a pre-planned contingency that Harold would have set in force just in case the worst came to the worst and they would have to pull out?
I think the men knew about the paths because the path line, one of the paths was immediately behind the defence position, where we believe the last defence was. So it was a strategically perfect place for a withdrawal.
Did you think they might have had in the planning stage, do you think they might have said, look, if the worst comes to the worst, we could always...
It's really difficult to say. I mean, I think the assumption that Harold knew the manor extremely well is one that I suppose I would make, because he was the owner of the manor house, but the manor house was one of many manors that his father owned in East Sussex. The real question is, if he did know the manor, then it would have been an extremely good place to keep William locked up, because he would have known exactly where to put the defence. And the fact the defence is there...
Well, very well thought out.
Suggests he does know, he knew exactly what he was doing. And whilst all the historians have always said, Harold was extremely rash because he marched 5 days forced march from Stamford Bridge, and that he should have waited in London and gathered his men and come down and fought with 20,000 men, and he wouldn't have lost the battle. But what the historians didn't realise is that if he knew that that William was at Wilting Manor, and he had that intimate knowledge of Crowhurst, which the evidence suggests he did, then he would know that once he put that barricade across the great field at Crowhurst, the Normans were stuffed because they couldn't go and get food. They had to come and meet him, and Wace in his document says that. He says in the document, that the Normans had to come to Harold, and Harold knew they had to come to him. And you think, well, that's a strange thing to record in a document. Why would the Normans have had to come and fight. You'd have thought in any normal battle they could just go somewhere else. But in this particular case, they were trapped
hemmed in by the geography.
on the peninsula by the geography of this particular valley. This is interesting because it's, it could be the back axle of a Morris Minor, but in fact, actually, it looks very much like something that could be attached to a Norman helmet.
Is it the right size?
It's exactly the right size because the helmet. You tend to think that Norman helmets were like they are in the battle reenactments, and all, the ones they make today. The ones they make today are made with rivets. They go across they usually got rivets around the rim and a cross strut. Well, of course, they couldn't do that in those days. The early Norman helmets were hammered metal, and all we've got in the early ones is these hammered metal structures with no means of attaching it to your head, no means of attaching the chainmail, and the way you wore your helmet in those days was, first of all, you put your hauberk on, then you put the chainmail on, which went over your head, then you had to attach the helmet. And there's a great expert who's looked into this, and his view was there had to be some other part for the helmet which we haven't got on it. There's only 16 that have ever been found, and there's a bit missing. This to me looks like it survived, and it might be the bit that's missing.
It's got some holes in it, hasn't it?
It's actually got two rivets, one there and one there. Now the early Norman helmets have 3 holes in them. Now you think, well, why would they have 3 holes? You can't attach the cross struts, but I'm pretty sure this is how you attached the helmet to the chainmail, and because the rivets were attached to the conical part, and the nose guard was attached to the conical part. The nose guard fits there, and there's a sort of clip on the back because you can see the mark on the where something was attached. We don't know what. And we also know that you could raise your helmet because you could raise the nose guard, because William does this on the battlefield and it's recorded, and it's shown in the Bayeux Tapestry, him raising his helmet. And so what this was, I think, was the rim of a Norman helmet, and we're trying to get it looked at.
What's that other one? Is that a similar thing? Or?
Well, it came from the same place. This was much lower down the Malfosse, and it looks to me like it's something to do with horses. It may well be a part of horse armour, but we won't know until somebody at the British Museum has looked at this.
We're going to be fighting a running skirmish with the weather. Forecast is for heavy showers interspersed with sun. This is very treacherous, this path up here. When we get up to where the actual gully is, you're going to get a real sense of how dangerous this cleft is, just off the side of the battlefield. At the moment we're walking along the path which runs through this strip of woodland which is on the side of the battlefield, which in the battlefield the last defensive position is up there. Probably just see through the trees where the light is, which is where we believe Harold made his final defensive position. And then this incline comes all the way down into the gully, but that's just a part of it. I mean, you can see that goes down maybe 30 feet, 40 feet from where I'm standing, and there's a further 30 feet up there up the slope, so I'm about halfway along that particular bit, but this isn't the worst bit.
Big. Well, it's probably a bomb.
We'll know soon enough.
We've found 2 bombs so far, whatever is that? That's not an iron object. Another one. very similar to the one I showed you earlier. You see, that I said was from, I thought it was from a horse. Yeah, I just don't know. That's it, isn't it? I don't know. What any leeches on them, tell me. Loads.
It's pretty shallow, but we'll just have to see if we get a signature in any of the bed coming up here.
Hold on.
It's in that lot that you just slung over.
Yeah. It's probably a little bit of...
Nick, just run by me again about the business with them putting stones down here.
Well, the big stones, you assume that they've fallen in.
Did the sources actually say they'd thrown stones down on them?
No, the sources said that they took their men back to their camp and buried them. But what they did with the guys down here, goodness knows. But there'd also been English here.
Yeah, they wouldn't have buried them.
No. Hey, go again. It's quite deep here.
You get a real sense for how steep the banks are here. You just, we're probably about 35 feet down.
This is sort of where you feel like this is a ravine here.
Yeah, this is definitely a gully. Look at that. The camera's aimed almost kind of 60, 70 degrees up.
Just that out of the way, just in case that's interfering with things. From this section here to the waterfall, there's a load of rocks in the gully, and the gully's still quite steep, so it's holding a lot of ground under here. And the fact that these rocks aren't anywhere else in this section, they sort of just run from the waterfall to here, makes you rather suspicious that why are they all here? Did they use the rocks to cover the bodies? If so, there might still be some stuff trapped under here. That's why we're looking. And interesting, it looks like wire, looks like old wire, but there's quite a lot of metal response, and so we've got to sort of investigate and waste our time digging lots of holes looking for something that's very difficult to find. Okay, so what we've got here is this little bit of land here. You can see this here. It's sort of a little bit grey, and actually it's an old Roman track. It's a Roman track. There's a curve to the land where it's been quite well built many years ago, and it curves off to the right. You can't really see it with all these trees, but it curves off to the right, comes down here, and where that plank is, that old piece of wood, was where a bridge originally existed. This is not part of the original structure.
Those timbers down there.
That's part of the bridge that's fallen in, because
what happens is bridges get replaced. The wood goes away and they just get replaced with more. But then they fall out of use. And this track was here and has been here since the time of the Romans. They used this track to carry ore from the forward bloomery, and this one goes across this little ravine here to the bloomery at Beauport Park. So it was well used and well constructed. Now, if you stand here and look at this place, you would think this can't be the place where 50 or 100 Norman knights died, but it is. Right up there, where the sky is bright, that is the very edge of the battlefield. It was just behind the Saxon lines, and this track goes across here. It curves up to the left, and then it curves back to the right up to the very back of the Saxon lines. So the Saxons knew this was here. When they were fighting that battle, they knew this was here, and when the end of the battle came and it was time to get off the battlefield, the sensible route was through this wood, across this track, and off to Beauport, and that's the way out. They knew that, the Normans did not. So when they came off the battlefield with their horses, these heavy horses, big monstrous tanks by the standards of the day, what they did was they came charging across here through the undergrowth, which is full of brambles, and as they say, brambles and thistles. And the impetus basically sent them down what was a cliff face. And this was the killing ground. They killed themselves because they trampled underfoot. And the story in the Chronicles says that they killed from being pounded to pieces. They pounded themselves to pieces. Now, part of the problem is you'd expect to find loads of stuff here. I had a good look around. There isn't anything here. But then you have to say, hold on, they killed themselves right next to a track with a bridge. Obviously, they could bring a cart here and take the people away. But they wouldn't have taken everything away. They wouldn't have taken the horses away. And there was the time they had certain priorities. You can be pretty sure that one of the priorities was simply to recover the dead, and a lot of stuff probably got left here. But this is a storm gully, and as we've seen up the top there, violent storms send a lot of water down here. So what we would expect now, and the reason I called you, is to say we need to look below this level, because below this level we've got a good chance of finding at least Norman horseshoes and possibly something else. So I think whilst it may not look like a deep ravine, it's probably 20 feet, and if you're on a heavy horse coming across there at 20 miles or 30 miles an hour, you would kill yourself. And that's what happened at the end and was called the Malfosse incident.
By all accounts, there were actually Saxons down here finishing them off as well.
Well, of course, I think if you'd come across the bridge and they all followed you and obviously incapacitated themselves,
you'd leap over the bridge and get stuck in.
You'd get in there and get stuck in. You might think the battle was turning, but obviously we know what happened. Now the issue is we've been looking too high up. The natural place is to look at the deepest part, but actually the remains, if there are any, are going to be down here. So we should look here. That's the...
Okay, so it's 2:30 in the afternoon. We've been at it for a few hours.
Yep.
What's the conclusion?
Well, the conclusion is we've found where the Malfosse is. We spent an awful long time looking north up the Malfosse with finding nothing. But as soon as we started to look below the Malfosse, we're finding some interesting things, and we really have to continue that process. The point is, the stream is a mile long, and what's going to happen almost certainly is that if there are any relics, they will probably all be together somewhere. And we've got a bone. There might be a badger bone. That was an interesting find.
Petrified as well. It looks like it's got. Have we got that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. If you just want to hold it up.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. I said it might be a badger bone. It could be gnawing along the edge there, but we'll find out what that bone is. You don't expect to find bones in streams anyway, no. but there are a lot of badgers here, and this is badger country. Crowhurst is badger country, so it could just be a badger bone.
Good.
Made us get us excited though.
Yeah, well,
Just think, oh,
it'd be
bit of the
interesting.
Battle of Hastings.
It would be interesting to give that to a forensics expert, and if they go, well, that's human, where did you get it? We could say, okay, well, that's...
Yeah, well, I robbed it from the graveyard earlier, didn't I?
Stuck it down there 10 minutes before we got there.
But the dowsing was interesting because the metal detector's great if you've got things that are in silt, but this is still quite difficult. It's difficult ground because it's got heavy stones and the silt is under the heavy stones, so getting at stuff is really difficult. And the dowsing gets this sort of thing, whereas the metal detector is looking for traditional metal objects, which at the age that we're looking at are going to be difficult to find.
It's just some of the things we got was a piece of piping. We'll pop a photograph up on that, and loads of wire and little fence nails, the little U-shaped fence nails. So we'll just, in fact, here's a photograph of the bone, and also some of these bits that we found as well.
Yeah.
So future,
We've got to come back straight away.
we'll come back straight away and do some more.
We've got to work down the stream. It's what we did at the very bottom. We didn't do it very thoroughly at the bottom because we didn't know at that time how important that site was. But the nature of metal things is that they'll get carried downstream in storms and settle and then get covered by silt. And then if they're deep enough, they'll survive. If they're not deep, if it's shallow, as this part of the stream is, it's much more difficult. But we could just be lucky.
We'll see.
We'll see.